Try that. Yeah, I just click go live. So I just clicked on anything. Oh, it is. It's doing it. What a twat. Here we go.
Are you on Facebook now?
We are there. There's me pulling loads of faces going, what a twat. We are streaming live to Facebook. So let me just close that one down. Come on, thing. Hopefully you can all hear us. We're a little bit behind. There's a little bit of a delay, so I've looked. So anyway, hello from two non-tech girls that have just spent the last 20 minutes trying to work out how to get it to go live on Facebook and not realizing that you just click the thing that says live. But anyway,
share it with your friends.
Please start a watch party because, as you probably know, Leah has now been banned on Facebook, which is why we are doing this live on Zoom. She's been banned for 7 days, supposedly for a post that she commented on, which I don't think we're falling for, because if you haven't seen Leah's live video that she did last night, you must go and watch it. She was speaking truth, or spitting truth, as I like to say, and I've never seen her quite so passionate. Now, she was talking about a local councillor in Essex. What's his name, Leah?
Gavin Callaghan.
Gavin Callaghan. Gavin Callaghan wants to lock down the whole of Essex into a Tier 2, I believe. Lockdown is Leah, I think, isn't it? That's right. So he wants to stop you from going to socialise with your friends in their house or meeting up in their garden. He basically really wants to put you back. I can see him coming in and out of my angel wings. He basically wants to put you back about 6 months to where we were before. And Leah was very distressed about it and made a number of points about how Mr. Callaghan is not obviously looking at any of the information or the data that's around. So for anyone that hasn't seen Leah's video, Leah, tell them a little bit about what you said, and then we're going to go through some of the claims that you made about him and what he is not looking at. So take it away.
Well, what's happened is that the government have now moved responsibility for all of the measures that are going to be affecting people's lives down from themselves to the councils. So they're giving councils carte blanche permission, without being scientists, to decide what science they want to listen to and then get paid to put their county into a lockdown. So the Essex councillors have apparently all had this little bit of a meeting since, with, I can just imagine, with great excitement about how much money they're going to be able to bring in by just pushing us up to the next level. So what Gavin was talking about was the trajectory of the proposal of the number of cases that have risen. So I gather it was something like 700 the previous week and up to 1,000 the following week. However, we're not actually talking about people going into hospital. So what he quoted from was a conversation that he said he'd had with the I guess NHS trusts within Essex, and they said, they've only got 4 weeks before the walls will be exploding and there'll be no room for any of the sick people. But they're talking about projections once again. They're talking about modelling. They're not talking about facts. They're not talking about sick people. They're not talking about people who are, being dragged out of their houses with this devastating, deadly disease. So what became very, very apparent to me was that there is no rationale. There's no rationale for why they would pick the tier that they've picked to restrict your ability to see your family and friends anymore, because it doesn't make any sense. That whole tier, let's face it, is nonsense. Because my daughter, for example, could go into a classroom with 30 odd people and spend the entire day with them, but she's not then allowed to go and spend 5 minutes with a family member that she's seen on a regular basis who is in her bubble. So, you know, the whole bubble thing, we've all been spreading our own germs on each other for months and months and months and months and months. So it makes no sense to suddenly then say that your bubble are no longer accessible to you.
And I think the odd thing about that as well that we spoke about was, bizarrely, if you go into a tier 2 lockdown, you like you've just said, you cannot go and mix with your family in another house. So you couldn't go and see your mum, for instance, or you can't do it in a garden, in an outside space, but you can still go to the pub until 10 p.m.
Yes.
So, you know, that's the logic that we're looking at. So obviously you were very, very upset about that, and as we know, Liverpool has today gone back into a tier 3 lockdown, which is pretty much where we were in March, isn't it? They've had to close the pubs, the gyms, and everything. Although there are many, many people in Liverpool that own gyms that have banded together and said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to take it. We're all going to stick together. And if we get fines, we're all going to help each other out. So we just have to see what happens there. But going back to your live, which I have to say, I showed my mum and she absolutely loved it. That I counted about 17 bollocks in there, I think. So it was amazing. You were definitely passionate. But as I said, you made a number of claims about, you know, not looking at the science and not looking at things. So I thought it would be really useful for us to talk, and I can share my screen through the Zoom, and I just want to pull up and share with anybody that's watching us on Facebook the kind of articles that perhaps you're like, whatever his name is it Gavin? I keep forgetting. It's such a horrible name.
This is it. He's actually Basildon, because what he's
Basildon.
done, he's attached the Basildon area into the Essex area. Now, just before you do what you're going to do, I just want people to keep in mind that Essex is one of the biggest counties in the whole of this country. And it ranges from just outside the city, just outside London and the London overspill, which is more densely populated, right the way out into the countryside, where people literally live on remote farms, and then there are small villages, and there's lots and lots and lots of those. So it's utterly ridiculous to take the whole county in the same way and cause them to all suffer in the same way. Not that anyone, I don't agree with any of it, should suffer in any way, because none of it makes any sense. But you're going to prove why none of it makes any sense with all
well,
of
between us, we're going to try and you know, show the kind of stuff that's out there, that if you actually do bother to get off your arse and go and have a look. I think we spent 20 minutes just pulling it together. We kind of had a lot of this stuff, and I'm going to share some screens, and at one point I'm probably going to go off camera and Leah will just be on while I get into my Twitter, because there's some bed data that I'll be able to pull up from there that I can't actually pull up from anywhere else. It won't let me do it. So I'm just going to go on to, I think the first thing that we'll have a look at is, well, what would you like to talk about first, Leah? I thought, you know, given now that we are all citizen journalists and are the real news, you know, that gets squashed by social media giants such as Facebook, because I've put up a post today from the CDC about masks and it has been taken down as false information. So they're basically calling the Centre of Disease Control in the USA false information peddlers. So I thought, given that we're the news now, why don't we start with a story that people might not know about. So if I just click onto it and then just come back to you, and I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Now, you should all be able to see this now on Facebook. I'm quite impressed that I know how to do this now. So you'll see the headline here: Birmingham students given already used COVID-19 tests. Now, some of you might already know this story, some of you might not. 25 test kits have been handed out in Birmingham, the council have admitted. The issue with that is that the people that received the kits were actually told not to share this information on social media because they didn't want it going public. So we have to ask ourselves, given that that was what was said to them, how many more kits have been sent out that have been used? How many more kits that might be contaminated. I mean, these people knew they'd been used. I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't have a clue if a thing had been used or not. I understand you break the swab or something. So, you know, and it was all over social media. So whatever we're doing with the delivery of these tests and how they're being rolled out, obviously is problematic and things are going wrong. And we know that, I'll stop sharing now, we know that you know, Serco are involved, and we know things about that, but that's for another time. So let's talk about lockdowns then. Let's talk about what my real concerns are about going into tier 2, tier 3, whatever. So first of all, I think it's fairly obvious to any bloody lunatic or person without a brain even, that if lockdowns work, the first lockdown would have worked and we wouldn't need a second, third, fourth, fifth lockdown because they work. So the first one would have worked, which it hasn't. And the reason for that is, and I'm sure you'll agree, lockdowns don't eradicate disease. They freeze you in time, okay, for anything that you're trying to prevent spreading quickly. And then when you unfreeze, you start up again, and it's exactly what's happened. So we locked down all over summer when it was the best times for those that aren't vulnerable to get it, you know, because it's 99.99999% non-fatal to most people in the summer months, when you can handle it more as well. So we lock down and then we open up and the kids go back to school and people start getting colds. Well, you know, like what happens every year. So, you know, lockdowns don't work, okay? But not only that, as you said yesterday, and remind people why you think this, you said the cure is worse than the bloody disease. Explain what you mean by that.
So the cure is worse than disease. Okay, so that's really looking at who is at risk and what percentage of the population that are currently being harmed are at risk versus what the harms actually are. So first of all, we'll just qualify that. The risk currently to the majority of the population is, well, you've got a 99.86% chance of surviving COVID. So that's the way to frame it. Very, 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 very small chance that anybody's actually going to become very unwell, and an even smaller chance that anyone would actually die. And we know that the average age of those who have passed away is 82 years of age, which is no different than any other virus or respiratory infection. So that's the risk that we're actually trying to avoid by creating this huge amount of pain and suffering amongst the rest of the population, everyone basically under the age of 82, who could be living their lives as normal, who could be in a position where they were just doing what you were doing back in March, that you took for granted, that you never even thought twice about leaving your house and going to see someone, meeting them for coffee, going shopping, doing all those wonderful things that we now are not allowed to do without restrictions, without certain modifications to our behavior. So what we're dealing with at the moment is the entire population is suffering from chronic stress, and it actually doesn't matter whether they're on our wavelength of really thinking this is just wrong. All of it's wrong, and we're not actually doing it to protect people from a virus, because we've done the research that Gavin Callaghan and all of the other councillors who are promoting this tier enhancement have not done. So the harm that chronic stress does is it literally shuts down your immune system. It stops your brain from functioning correctly. It causes changes to your natural behavior. It stops people from being able to sleep. It affects the things that they would normally do in terms of diet, motivation, creativity. All of those factors start to become infringed upon by the stress that we're all dealing with. Now, the other thing that starts to happen, and I just want to quote from something which is really truly devastating, but a fact, and this is Gabor Mate, who is a Jewish descent, well, he is a Jew, descendant of Holocaust survivors. And one of the things that he shares in his book, he writes a lot about addiction. He's an addiction specialist, so he knows a lot about trauma. And one of the things that he mentions is mothers, Jewish mothers. This is when the world in in the, to the rest of the world, there was nothing really happening in Germany, other there was some unrest and they had some economic crisis. But amongst the Jewish communities, they were already very aware that there was some changes to the attitudes of the many towards that community. They were being blamed for the economic damage that was happening. So people were already starting to look at them differently, treating them differently, weren't being very kind to them, stopping using their services. There were already quite a lot of things that were happening because of this sort of propaganda that was going on in their media. And one mother had taken her baby, it might have been his mother he was talking about, to the doctors, said, "My baby keeps crying." And the doctor said, "The Jewish babies are all crying." And that's because the Jewish babies couldn't understand what was happening in the environment around them, but they damn well knew that their parents and the people in their community were stressed. Because stress is something that goes beyond our conscious awareness to something that we pick up energetically, emotionally. We understand completely now in 2020 about things like hormones, that a man knows when a woman is in that part of her cycle. He can unconsciously, there's this system that actually picks up and is aware that there's a particular smell in the environment that they can detect, and it makes them more attracted to that particular female, right? So we know that there are these other systems. I know we're sort of sliding around all over, but it's all about the point. This unconscious communication system that we have, that is how we know each other, how we communicate with each other, is what our children, every child and every adult, but every child is actually succumbing to this. Whether their parents are freaked out and want them to wear masks and they shouldn't be expected to do that, whether their parents are just frantically discussing the concerns that they have, whether it's about the virus that they're terrified their child is going to contract or give to them or give to granny or whatever, or if they're actually in our world and aware of the wrongs that are actually happening and how devastating this all is, and this feeling of not having any control or pushback to say this is not acceptable. We've researched the scientists. We've all become bloody researchers, whether we were or not. And I've been a researcher for 3 decades now, in the health side of things, initially for personal reasons, later for professional reasons. So I'm very well averse with doing research, but lots of people are now doing research and finding that actually there is no justification for what they're actually doing, but also the harms causing job losses. Job losses cause enormous stress in relationships. There has been a massive hike in people looking for rental properties because their relationships have broken down. So that's more children now with one-parent families, and they're not one-parent families. It's a horrible term, actually. I don't know why I use it. That's because I was indoctrinated that as I was a child and I was supposedly a one-parent family. But you are going to have children who are suffering that kind of family breakdown, and the economic effect that that's going to have. That we know that there's already an increase in poverty. We know that there's already an increase in mental health problems. What most people don't realize is the hospital units that were overwhelmed during the crisis were the mental health units. They have never seen so many people suffering from psychosis. Psychosis is a very serious condition, and some people get stuck in psychosis. It can require an enormous amount of effort, both chemically, which isn't necessarily the right way, but to help people to find their balance and to return to normality. But it's a very devastating condition, and it comes out of this horrific level of stress and a feeling that something is so wrong and so different and so abnormal that it's like living in a horror movie. And that's what is causing people to end up in hospital with those sorts of conditions, other than the fact that we know a huge number have committed suicide. The numbers are astronomical. I've been challenged on that repeatedly. Where do you get your figures from? Where do you get your figures from? But the figures are out there, and coming from the mental health field, we also know that children's safeguarding. So we're talking about harms to the population as a result of lockdown measures and the measures that the government are choosing to take as their excuse being that they're desperately trying to protect us from this deadly disease. So removing safeguarding measures from children who are in care, and the increased number of children going into care as a result of all of the stuff that we've already talked about. We know that there was this enormous rise in reports to the police of children, of family, abuse, whether it's, women being battered or whether it's the children and they're unsafe in the environment. We know that addictions and and the propensity to drinking and other things have massively increased. Again, when that's people's coping mechanism because they've already suffered trauma in life, then they naturally go to that when they're in a state of trauma, which this situation currently is for everyone. So traumatize the nation for the sake of saving it's not a handful of people, but now we're really talking about the same levels of population decline that you would have in any flu season. There isn't anything different if you just look at the statistics.
Yeah, and what I was going to say to you is as well, what is, very troubling and also both odd, is that the vast majority of the world have dealt with this novel virus in this way by lockdowns, which of course is not a usual way, that it's not a preferred way of dealing with a pandemic. I mean, to me, this isn't a pandemic. I'm not even sure if it's an epidemic. It's like flu figures that we have every year, and you don't deal with those sorts of things by locking people down. Why do I say that? Well, Dr. David Nabarro said that, didn't he? Special envoy to the WHO. He's actually said, which I'm going to call up some scientific stuff. So I'm just going to go on and call this up to share with people, which really kind of backs up what you're saying there about, the harms that this is, putting on to people that are befalling people because of lockdown are just horrendous, and I don't understand why Gavin doesn't know about this when you do and when I do. So let me just get a couple of things up on the screen. Bear with me a second.
By the way, the live says that it's stuck at 57 viewers, which has never happened.
Well, that's because we're shadow banned. So never mind. So let's share this first screen, which is an article that is in The Spectator from today, sent to me by Alex Webster this morning. He thought I might like it, but he warned I might cry, which I said, well, I'm crying every day. So, nothing new there then. So this is a medic's case against another lockdown. And I think it's really important that it's been written by a medic, and it really supports everything that you're saying. And the opening paragraph is really interesting. It's on the screen if anybody wants to read it. It says, "Do no harm" are 3 words all doctors must follow in the course of their work. And these words make me convinced that COVID-19 lockdowns are the wrong approach. Now, it goes on to say a growing number of doctors are on this doctor's side. Now, the doctor that's written this is Dr. Matt Strauss. There's a link to his name at the top if you want to call up the article and go and have a look. And he absolutely makes such a good argument about how he prescribes medications, for instance, lower cholesterol and things like that, because they've had international randomized double-blind controlled trials over many, many years, and they've proved that benefits far outweigh the risks, whereas you don't prescribe thalidomide anymore, or femfen, which causes heart problems, because the benefits do not outweigh the risks. So he goes on to say, if lockdowns were a prescription drug for COVID-19 treatment, the FDA would never have approved it. Okay, it wouldn't be allowed. Okay, it wouldn't be allowed to be on the market because it's so bloody dangerous. So he mentions a bit about the modelling, but I wanted to draw everybody's attention to the fact that, these politicians and these councillors can't argue anymore that they haven't got enough data to decide what the harms of lockdowns might be. Okay. We've been in lockdown on and off throughout the world for 7-8 months now. So the Lancet have done a study. They've published analysis from 50 countries, okay? That analysis that those researchers have produced, it goes to show that lockdowns were not associated with decreased mortality from COVID-19, okay? This is hard data. It cannot be waved away by modelling, by Chris Whitty and, Patrick Vallance on their train of 50,000, a week, rubbish, okay? So this is hard outcome data. But what is really frightening is he gives some statistics. this is horrendous. In the US, homicides up 50% compared to last summer. People are killing people, you know, people are snapping. Domestic violence in France, calls up 30%. In Canada, 3 times more people committing suicide or contemplating it. In British Columbia alone, overdose deaths have tripled from pre-pandemic levels. And this is what happens, isn't it, Leah, when you deprive children of their education and you deprive adults of their livelihood and you stop elderly people from being able to socialise, despair and desperation sets in, doesn't it? So, you know, it as I say, oh, sorry for going off there, as I say, really supportive of that in that article. I just want to bring up another article for people to have a look at if they want to as well, which I'll just share on our screen. Now, this is an article that goes back to the 21st of September. So it's not, you know, this has been being talked about for a while. And this was when they were talking about a circuit breaker 2-week lockdown, which of course they're still touting, which would just be absolutely devastating for people's businesses, finances, health. And as you've rightly said, Leah, the stress that it causes and what your body does when it gets stressed, what it produces in the way of cortisol and how that impacts upon your physical health, you know, cannot be underestimated. But this is an article from Dr. Rennie, he's going to have to forgive me, Hoenderkamp, and he is talking about more COVID shutdowns turning a dangerous situation into a disaster. And this is an article that's on the Daily Mail that was produced on the 21st of September. And I would urge anybody to go and read this, because it makes it very clear that actually lockdowns just channeled COVID-19 into the very places where the most vulnerable people were supposed to be sheltered. It really puts it back into care homes, because when you lock down and you clear out hospitals, which is, you know, they're talking about this on the circuit breaker again, you know, clearing hospitals, what do you do with sick and vulnerable people that are in hospitals? Well, you send them out, and you send them out into care homes, and then you lock them in and you take away their support services. You know, we know this because of what's come out and what I've been saying and what's been in Amnesty, in the Amnesty report as well. So there is another article that I wanted to draw to your attention, and bear with me.
Doing a great job, Claire.
Do you reckon? I don't know. So, you know, given that we know that the harms that could come to people from this, after all, I mean, you know, very few people really have bounced back from where we were, you know, from March to July, business-wise. Some people have not recovered and will not recover business-wise. Some are trying to carry on, and a second lockdown is probably going to be fatal. And we know from experience that when we're told that it's going to be a couple of weeks, it is not going to be a couple of weeks. We are not, you know, it is not going to be a couple of weeks, and financially people are not going to survive, you know, a second lockdown, and that brings with it all sorts of issues, as we've just discussed. But so given that we know that, and we're not running the country and we're not scientists, although there is many scientists that agree with us, as I said, Dr. David Nabarro, envoy to the WHO, go and look him up, one has to ask oneself why they would want to do such a thing. And of course, it all comes back down to money, I think. So let's share this. Anyone seen this article? I'm sure you have. It went a bit viral on Twitter when I shared it, and it was buried at the bottom of the article because this was a BBC article. Note the picture with the 2 people with the masks on in the pub. We'll come on to masks later. So buried at the bottom here, after sort of telling you what the alerts were, you've got here, I don't know if you can see my cursor pointing to it, according to a memo seen by the BBC, public health officials will receive proposals later on Thursday about certain things. You come down, and then it says the memo seen by the BBC shows the plans for additional money for local authorities placed into tiers 2 or 3. So the higher you go, the more money per head that you get. So they're putting them onto a mapping system, and they're deciding that if you go into a tier 2, you'll get £1 per head of population. So if you go into a tier 2, you get £1, a tier 3, £2, right? So the difference, say for Liverpool, which is about 1 million people, it's just under 1 million people in Liverpool, it's either £1 million or £2 million. Okay, so you double your money if you go for the harder lockdown. Now, I don't know if that's per month, per week, just a one-off payment. It didn't say that in that article, but one has to ask oneself if it is coming down to money, Leah. What do you think?
Well, what struck me when I saw Gavin Callaghan letting everyone know that they have campaigned, or they are campaigning to the government. I mean, I know the Sun has its reputation, use the word beg, that they are begging for us to be put under these restrictions. Why weren't they doing that before if they had such a huge concern about the overwhelm of all of our hospitals and the dead and dying that are going to be dragged out of their houses and thrown into the mortuaries? You know, why weren't they already fighting for this? And the other thing is, it's just horribly insulting to people's intelligence to make this presumption that we're all that thick that we haven't noticed. And I noticed this months ago, and it was one of the first very viral posts that I actually had people taking a lot of interest in, was when I went in search of some reassurances about my oldest son, who lives and works in London, traveling on the tubes every day, a hive of activity, crushed in, anyone who's ever been on the tubes knows that you're squashed up to get together with other people, right in each other's breathing spaces. And this was, keep in mind, all the way through the peak of infection. So we know now that the virus had been in the community since late last year. So November, December, January, February, coming into March. So all of this time, people are crammed next to each other on the tubes. I wanted to reassure myself as a mum that my son was going to be safe, because at the time he was still continuing to go into work. It was a case of, I think a lot of people suddenly stopped going to work because they thought they weren't allowed to, and then realised that in fact what the government said, this is just how unclear they are in everything they're doing.
As we know. Yeah.
People thought they couldn't go to work, and then realised actually, no, you can go to work if you can't work from home. So a lot of people suddenly went, like all the builders, for example, my husband, construction workers, went straight back out to work because they realised that they weren't actually forbidden from doing it. Now, some of their clients were like, oh, no, go away. But actually, fortunately, plenty of them have got common sense, and they were quite okay with the idea of someone working outside in the, whatever. Anyway, back to London and my bit of research that I did, finding it on the government website, looking for how many people have actually died in London of COVID. And then there's this page, and it's saying, so many people have got on their death certificate the COVID, but they didn't die of it, sort of bit, 6,000, which I actually thought, wow, that's really a tiny amount when you think. I thought, come on, London with its tubes, bacteria ridden environments, it's hot down there, it's humid down there, lots of people sweating down, it's going to be horrific. So I still thought that was ridiculously low compared to the panic and the what we were being told, and the world has gone crazy with all these dead and dying. But when I read on, I actually discovered the actual number of people who died of COVID was 91 at the time. 91 people had died of COVID in London. And this was like probably May, June time that I actually discovered this website. And I've tracked it since, and the numbers have increased of those who had died of COVID. And obviously so have the larger numbers. But of course, that's when you start to look at what are you talking about here? By then, we already had heard Professor Valence state a few times actually about just because someone has COVID on their death certificate doesn't actually mean they died of it. And that was in one of their press briefings. It's a fact that a lot of those people who are convinced that lockdowns are important, that there is still a deadly virus, that they are still at risk, that, some people actually think 10% of the population have died. How many is that? That would be
6.7 million.
6.7 million have died. And there's actually under 2,000 people who've died of COVID. The rest are died. It's a bit spurious as to whether they had anything to do with COVID. It's something that was registered on the death certificate if there was a test. And we know, because I believe yeah, so Chris Whitty also reiterated this a number of times when he stated the fact that there really was a very, very tiny percentage of people who were actually succumbing to the disease, which, as we know, also back in March, they reduced it down from high consequence infectious disease to low consequence infectious disease, which is, guess what, the same as flu. So given that we know all of this, why doesn't Gavin Callaghan, and why do not all of the councillors in the Essex County Council area not all know what we as members of the public know? Why are they not doing research? Because I would have presumed that their job is to kind of protect the people of their community.
Now see, this is one thing that I'm glad that you've said, because I don't think that a lot of people realise that most of the MPs that are working in constituencies, you know, and that, you know, when they're in the House of Commons and they're supposed to be voting on things, they haven't got a bloody clue. They really haven't got a clue, as was evidenced, which I must come on to, by Matt Hancock's misunderstanding of the false positive rate. But even more worrying than that, let me get my Twitter up and show you Nadine Dorries. So bear with me while I go off camera. Leah will keep you company. Do I go off camera when I do this,
No, you
Leah?
don't. We just kind of, we slide over to the side.
So I don't go off camera. So I just need to be aware not to don't you be looking at my login details on Twitter, you horrible lot. So
yeah, type it in first. I think my cheekbones look quite good when I smile on here. Look.
Oh, lovely. Okay, so I can't even remember my own password. So
you can tell we're not good news readers, you know. My office is a horrible mess because we're
we've tried really hard to pull this together at a very short space of time. It would help if I put the right email in. A really short space of time, because we're so concerned that, you know, the lies basically in the news and by the politicians, and I can't get into my frigging Twitter. So
the misinformation, which is so interesting.
Okay, yeah, let's not call it lies, because we'll get told off. Do you know what I mean? So, but
it's misuse of information. Actually, that's something that I've started saying. It's not just misinformation; it's misuse of information. So the information itself might have some kind of
propagandized, as I call it, which is, you know, really quite concerning given what you were talking about. Oh God. Reset your password, use the code below. Okay, so yeah, which is really what you were talking about with Germany and what happened there. You know, it was propaganda in the country to turn, you know, a majority of people against a minority of people, and then the news was then used to hide from the rest of the world what was going on. So I don't want to add my phone number. Right, we're up, so I can show. Look, there's Leah Butler Smith. So I can show you Nadine Dorries, right? And you would be afraid, be very afraid, given all that we've spoken about, what these people are running our country, and they're making major decisions for us. Okay, so let's get Nadine Dorries up. Oh dear God, she's only took her post down. I'm not surprised, actually. I'm really not surprised. She's took the post down. She basically said that there is no herd immunity. That is what she said. She said on Twitter, on a post, and she's took it down because everybody's gone a bit bonkers about it, and rightly so. She turned around and said that herd immunity does not exist, because if it did exist, then we would have eradicated measles. Okay, she doesn't understand the concept of what herd immunity means. Okay, so I think we should educate her because she's only the Minister for State and Health, and one of her jobs is to look after people's mental health as well. So let's educate Nadine Dorries on what herd immunity is, shall we? So herd immunity is the concept that the virus goes through a community and a population, many of whom will not be vulnerable to get very ill from it, and as a consequence it weakens over time. It doesn't mean you don't have a virus anymore. It just means that it's gone through so many people that there isn't people left to infect, so it weakens in that sense. It isn't as bad. You haven't got as many deaths or serious illnesses from it. She seems to think that it means that you eradicate a virus. Okay, the scary thing about it is, on the one hand, she says that a vaccine is needed to produce herd immunity, but that herd immunity doesn't exist.
And what's so fascinating, because obviously we are researchers and we do invest all of our time, we're not actually doing any work, which is what we're supposed to be doing, into this research. So what we know is that there are some great investigations going on, that actually they're tracking, they're not investigating, they're tracking. So there's a couple of things I want to say here. I want to talk a little bit more about herd immunity and a little bit about the vaccine that is currently being tested and trialed for. So first of all, come back to herd immunity, and what I've learned about that is you could almost say that if we'd let all of the people, especially the young people, the young healthy people, just go about their business, go to raves, spend time with each other, breathe all over each other, snog each other, have sex with each other, you know, let's do all of that normal.
Oh, lovely.
If we let all the healthy people do that all the way through the summer, do you know what that would have been? It would have been a circuit breaker. Because it would literally have allowed for that herd immunity to have built, so that then it acts as a circuit breaker. It stops it from kind of spreading into the rest of the population at the strength that it previously did. So you like a fire break, that's really what the young people would have been able to do. And that's something we missed. You know, we missed that opportunity to be able to do that. Now, the second thing I want to say about herd immunity that I've learned from listening to people like Michael Yeadon, who is an amazing supporter of everything that we're trying to do, is that you have a number of different sorts of immunity. And again, through my years of research, I've come to learn a little bit more about this. For example, most people probably don't know this, but a mother who has had, oh, where did you go? A mother.
I'm here. I've put the herd immunity article up. Yeah.
So the mother who's had the measles, for example, when she then has a baby, that baby is already born with a little bit of programming, because the cells learn, they have this programming of immunity. Now, that doesn't mean to say the child won't then get measles and then have some of the symptoms of measles, but his body already has an understanding of it. So it's already kind of armed and prepared to fight and to beat that virus down. And then you have the lovely lifelong herd immunity, which then we've, you know, again, scientists who study immunity have found out that there are these other amazing side effects of the type of immunity that you get from things like fighting off the measles that protects you from heart disease later on in life. It's astonishing. It's an extraordinary study. And it's one that this lot that we're talking about here, these councillors, this idiot Nadine, what's her face, and an awful lot of the MPs, sadly, have got no idea about any of it. So your first line of defence, whenever you're near a virus, is the mucosal area. So there's all kinds of fighting stuff going on in the nasal passage, in the mouth, and then it's obviously going into the body, and there's all the other things that get activated. So it goes through a whole series of different stages of different kinds of immunity. And it also has the antibodies. You know, you've heard people talking about antibodies and saying, well, there's no evidence of any antibodies. But what's been shown now is that because you have T cells and they have this way of memorizing things that they've come into contact with, but they don't stay. So it's a little bit like you've got your soldiers at the front gate protecting you from the baddies that are coming in, but they've already fought them all off. And so eventually, you know, there's no baddies around. Well, they're not going to stand on guard forever when they don't need to.
No, they're going to go, aren't they?
of the system. The system doesn't need to do that. So they back off. They go and have a chill out, you know, go for a cup of tea and enjoy themselves for a bit. And then, oh, hang on a minute, the enemy's coming again. So this lot, well, they already learned how to fight off that particular invader before. So they just come straight back and they beat them like that. And that's how T cells and antibodies actually work. I think I've got that right. I know that's how antibodies work. I'm not sure if it's the T cell antibodies, but the antibodies, that's how they work. That's why if you test for antibodies, they're not always present when you're doing the test, but it doesn't mean to say that that human being doesn't have that encoded memory for how to fight. So that helps to explain why a lot of people in the same family, 4 people living in the same house, a virus comes in. This is what happened in my house. Perfect example. Back in March, my mother got very, very sick because she does have comorbidities, and she ended up in hospital with a chest infection, quite a serious chest infection. It was a new virus that we were all suffering with. I had literally, you could check every single one that they said this new virus had. So whether you speculate on whether there is such a thing, or you just accept that there was something that was a bit different, it doesn't matter. I had it, and because I'm very inactive, I work from home, I have done for years, and I'm a bit of a lazy cow. So that's one of the things I'm going to work on. So I hadn't been as active, therefore that's part of helping the lymphatic system. That's what part of your immune system to function better, which is why as you get older and you become less and less mobile, that sitting disease is a real thing. It's a damaging or limitation to your immune system and your immune function, right? So we're kind of learning about these things. We know more about this stuff. So what else happened to the people in my family? Well, my daughter was pregnant at the time, and she actually gave birth to her second child, day 1 of lockdown, while still having some of these symptoms. Now, neither she suffered adversely and the baby, no symptoms whatsoever. So all of that scaremongering that you've read in the press about pregnant women, about newborn babies, about poor babies and mums being separated at birth because she had one of these fraudulent tests, which mean absolutely bugger all, is disgusting. So then
we'll come on to them as well in a minute.
So then, just to finish that little example of my own family, my son and my husband both developed a bit of a cough, and we've actually got my son's friend who's been living here since lockdown because he actually was supposed to be going in the army, and they stopped it all. So he suddenly found himself homeless. So he's been here since then. And so they had a bit of a cough that went on for a little while, but that was it. That was the only symptoms they had, and they were all absolutely fine. So that would be an example of how each person's individual immune system is actually going to deal with the infection that it's been presented with. And I believe, if I remember rightly, my son-in-law, married to my daughter, didn't have anything. So his body's obviously already recognized it, decided it knows what to do with it, fought it off, and that was it. No symptoms.
Which makes absolute perfect sense, because I know myself, I've had a shocker of a cold sometimes, and I sleep in bed next to my husband, slobbering all over him because I'm shivering and snuggled, and he doesn't get anything. Or vice versa, you know. And it's why you don't all go down in a household with a cold altogether. Okay. And some don't get it, some do, and there's reasons, you know, like you've said. And this has been proven, isn't it, by people that have been quite ill with various things, and the spouse or the child or the whatever that lives with them just hasn't had it, hasn't got it. And it's no different for this, because you know what, we've had viruses ever since we've been on this earth, and the fact that we are still alive is down to herd immunity. That's how it works. So on my screen at the moment, can you see my screen at all, Leah? Are you watching on?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see Nadine Dorries. Great, isn't it? She was elected. She's an MP for Mid Bedfordshire, so which is not far from me. So if you live in Mid Bedfordshire, do consider dropping her a line to let her know that she's trained as a nurse. Thank God she isn't nursing me when she doesn't believe in herd immunity, that it exists, right? It is frightening the responsibility this woman has. So she's the Minister of State for Patient Safety, Suicide Prevention and Mental Health, and they lead on the test and trace framework, social distancing, mental health, suicide prevention and crisis prevention, offender health, vulnerable groups, everything you can see there on my screen. She has direct lead on, and she publicly stated on Twitter last night that she does not believe that herd immunity exists. These are the people that are running the show, people. Please don't think for 1 minute that they know what they are doing or talking about. So we're going back to our article, which is in the New York Times, which is still on herd immunity. And this is the news, I think probably most people know, that came out yesterday, that the White House have embraced the Great Barrington Declaration. So this is the, in case you don't, whoop, whoop, our government have got out a couple of nutritionists to say that all the scientists in it are shit, or they've wheeled out Dr. Hilary Jones, who actually, he said yesterday that democracy should be suspended altogether. We should have no rights to protect for this. There's no end to that man's psychopathy. Let's not even go there. So the White House have given the thumbs up to the Great Barrington Declaration about herd immunity, and there's a link to that Great Barrington Declaration there, which I'll just open for you. So this is a New York Times article from yesterday, if you do want to read it. So that's obviously extremely good news, and I think everybody's seen the Great Barrington Declaration now, which is here, and you can see how many languages it's in. So you can read it, you can sign it. If we read it, it's not that long, okay? Tells you all the doctors that have signed up to it as well. You can have a look and see who's how many people have signed it. So you've got 500,000 nearly concerned citizens, and nearly 10,000 medical and public health scientists, and 25,000 medical practitioners. Now, what does that tell you about the medical practitioners? Because obviously this is worldwide, okay? So, you know, I'm sure there's many more medical practitioners that could sign this, but I would suspect that not 25,000 medical practitioners that have signed this are actually publicly speaking out, because they're told they will lose their jobs if they do. So that's just an interesting thing to be aware of, that the White House has said it approves, or it supports the Great Barrington Declaration as a way forward. There's a couple of states, there's that lady from the state in America, and I can't think where it is, it's South Dakota or North Dakota, I can't think of her name, and she is very much in favour of that kind of approach. So what we've seen so far from what we've talked about is they're not considering the harms that lockdown are going to. Any form of restrictions now that are imposed on people are life limiting, they're business limiting, they're economically limiting, and they're life limiting. And part of the country is in worse restrictions than others, which fragments even more, because people think, well, it's not happening to me, so I don't need to worry about it. Well, we do, because if we do, because it will come to us anyway. But even if it wasn't, we need to worry about those people in those areas. So we know then they're not considering that, because we've had a local councillor and many MPs, Robert Jenrick, on Talk Radio yesterday with Julia Hartley-Brewer, calling everybody that went to a pub irresponsible, because that, they're spreading the virus. So she politely asked him, well, why do you go to the Commons Bar then, if you think everybody that goes into a pub is so irresponsible? And he couldn't answer. Like I said, so they're not considering all of this, okay? We know it's one rule for them and another for us, but we're proving it, because we're showing you this stuff that they are not considering, okay? These suicide rates, these whatever. So they're not considering that. One of our top ministers in charge of this whole response doesn't believe in herd immunity, okay? Says it doesn't exist, and apparently was once a nurse. That's deeply concerning on top of that, okay? They're ignoring the plethora of doctors, scientists, and others in the medical community that are putting an alternative view up for this. So there's no debate anymore. We're not debating, we're not looking, and we're not reaching a balance. We're not looking at things proportionately. It's, this is what you will do, and anyone else that says anything different is a nutter, a liar, not very good at their job, a charlatan, or just will be shut down immediately. Okay, so that's the kind of people that are running the country at the moment. And why am I making the point of that? Not to the people that I know that are watching this that already know this, but I've set this to public, and I want this to be shared with people that don't know this, don't know these things because they only watch the BBC. You know, it is, the BBC unfortunately has become a propaganda arm for the government. Okay, what I'm showing you now, you can easily find, and you can make your own mind up then. You don't have to listen to me, but you also don't have to just listen to the bloody BBC. Okay, so let's go on now to masks, which is another great, you know, intervention by our government 6 months down the road, 5 months down the road, whatever it was, which we obviously was what sparked you on your crusade, Leah. I remember you said, I'm not having this, and I'm going to Hyde Park, and you didn't really think about what you were saying, and you were like, oh God, I've got to go to Hyde Park and sort this out now. And it was amazing. You started all the protests, really, I think, in my opinion. You gave people confidence. And you know, we've had lots and lots and lots and lots of arguments and about masks, and people have said, yeah, but you know, there's no studies, there's no peer-reviewed studies. You know, it doesn't matter that doctors will tell you certain things. So what I want to share with people today, and this is very, very funny, if I'm honest with you, is this. Let me just share it so that you can see it. This study here from the CDC, which was reported in the Federalist, which, you know, again, you don't hear of these publications, these news providers, because what you will get told is that they're right-wing or fascist or whatever, but they're not. They're alternative. Okay, so a CDC study came out on the 12th of October in this article. It was a report released in September, actually. There's a link to the report here, which we'll get up, and it shows that masks and face coverings are not effective in preventing the spread of COVID-19, even for those people who consistently wear them. A study conducted in the USA in July found that when they compared 154 case patients who tested positive for COVID-19 to a control group of 160 from the same healthcare facility who were symptomatic but tested negative, over 70% of the case patients were contaminated with the virus and fell ill despite always wearing a mask. Okay, so let me just, where did that open up that report? Let me just see where it popped up.
Pointing to it on my screen. It's the next tab.
It's there we go. Thank you so much. So you should be able to see this now, guys. So it's quite a long, there was an error in it, and it's been corrected, but basically what it will show you is the age groups and the case patients, how many people, where they've been and that kind of thing, and following recommendations such as wearing a face covering or mask or social distancing, and then others not following recommendations, and the comparison here. So you've got this page here, reported use of cloth face covering or mask 14 days before illness onset. People that never wore a mask, 6 cases were ill, and people that always wore a mask, 108 were ill. So I posted this on Facebook, and it was really quite strange because within about 10 minutes of posting it, it's been taken down, and I've been told if I post anything like that again, I'll be on another ban. So, you know, that's why I wanted to come on and screen share this with you guys, so that you could see that. So that is the Federalist. That is an article from the 12th of October. CDC study finds overwhelming majority of people getting coronavirus wear masks, with a link to the report in there. So please go and have a look at that yourself. There was a couple of other things, and I'm not sure because we were filling about getting so many articles. I wanted to direct you to this guy, Robert Dingwall, as well, government advisor on pandemics. Okay, so they're getting it wrong about masks. They're getting it wrong about the cure being worse than the virus. You know, they're doing all these awful things that are not helping, and they're just making it worse. Nadine Dorries doesn't believe in herd immunity, and now their own government advisor on pandemics is turning to the press to make clear that the devastating social and economic impact of the restrictions are way in excess of the threat that the disease itself poses. Almost speaking those very words that came out of your mouth, Leah, and about how the death rates are still remarkably low. This is not a modern plague. In the weekend in October the 2nd, COVID accounted for just 3.2% of all fatalities in British hospitals. All fatalities, okay? On April the 8th, according to the ONS, 975 people died. So don't forget that was when it was curve right up here, yeah. Compared to 74 last week. 74. That's where we are. Daily Mail, October the 13th. Dr. Robert Dingwall, go and have a look at that article, please do. I'll just stop sharing my screen for a moment where I can get rid of a few things then. So, yeah, so what do you think about that, Leah? You know, you've got scientists and government advisors saying these things. So what do you know, what can we put it down to, do you think?
Well, it's interesting that the different sorts of ideas that people have, and you know, we've spoken before. Certainly, I've never had much interest in politics or politicians. I've worked with some, and I've had reason to meet.
Oops, sorry, Leah. Sorry, guys.
What was that?
That was me, which I'm going to play for the people at the end that haven't seen it. So sorry about that. I started a YouTube video by accident, so I have to apologise. Anyway, so carry on, Leah, where you were, because it was really interesting.
Oh yeah, so what we have to remember is, I know that obviously there are a lot of concerns, a lot of theories that, you know, there's this bunch of people sitting at the top of some, you know, tower, mountain somewhere, like the Greek gods, moving around the pieces that are affecting all of us. Now, there are other people who have a strong belief that the government have just made a lot of mistakes, and they're really deeply embarrassed. And our children, grandchildren will be paying for this forever. So therefore, they don't want to sort of step back and go, oops, sorry about that. We should have done a Sweden. We can't keep pretending that Sweden didn't actually do it right, even though they had their own set of mistakes and lessons that they learned along the way. So what they're trying to do is keep it going for long enough so that somehow something, whatever, maybe the vaccine, is going to come along and give them a reason to go, right, you're all free to go now, back to being a democratic country. What we know is that that's not true at all. There are various things that have been sitting in the wings, if you like. We know that this pandemic situation, as a way to try and change things, to restructure things, whether it's government-wise, whether it's health freedom, those things have been eked out before. They've tried it before with the other pandemics that have come along, and certain names like Ferguson have been jumping up every time. All it's really doing is illustrating for all of us that there is an awful lot of corruption amongst government and people who influence governments. We know that there's a lot of that, but that doesn't mean to say that everyone in the government is corrupt. It doesn't mean to say they're all horribly dishonest. It doesn't mean to say they're all psychopathic lunatics. But you've also got on the fringes of the government, you've got all of these opportunists. So like carpetbaggers, you know, the carpetbaggers used to come through the fields of dead and go through their pockets and nick all their bits and bobs. And they were considered to be really dastardly human beings with no morals whatsoever. Really, they were opportunists. You had that back in 2008 when we had the financial crash. Lots of people who, again, not psychopaths, not demonic, not horrible people, just bloody opportunists. And they went, oh, opportunity here. Let me see if I can jump on that bandwagon. So we've got a lot of that sort of thing going on. So within government, and there are legal cases, I believe, going on around that sort of investigation of who gave what contract to who. And so, you know, millions of pounds have been dished out to friends of friends. Lots of very naughty things have gone on, but that's also not new in government. That's a known thing. Like even my dad told me that that's something they know about, has happened and does happen and continues to happen. So that's not really part of the problem. But things like the World Economic Forum, like this Build Back Better, like who's funding Build Back Better, like those kinds of things that we're sort of seeing, like knowing that George Soros is actually funding every fact-checking company. George Soros is an evil human being. Very
yes.
Evil. And he's funding fact-checking because he's going to control what we're allowed to say to each other because he doesn't want us to talk about what's really going on. So like I say, it's not as if they're clever enough. I like to comfort myself with this idea that they don't have the power to just flick a switch and do what they're doing right now. It has to have happened slowly but surely, nudge, 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 nudge. We talked about boiling the frog, that analogy.
It's the nudge unit, as it's called, to,
Yeah.
to get you to change your behaviours and way of thinking. Yes.
Yes, and identity. So that's something psychologically about people's identity, that they identify themselves as either being good or bad, the right side, the wrong side, and who is that other side. And that's what they've managed to do by getting people to wear masks. They've given them this sense of identity, and now they've got designer masks, and they have masks that go with their outfits, and that it's become part of their identity that says, I'm a good person. And actually, some people will find it difficult to stop wearing a mask, even if the government said tomorrow, look, we've really cocked up here. We're going to go for the herd immunity now, and we want you to all just get back to life. There will be a number of people who will be like, oh, no, keep my mask on, because now it's become part of who they are, and they do perceive themselves to be righteous in their wearing of it. And it's considered completely appropriate for them to disparage anyone who doesn't and blame anyone who doesn't.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff that you've said is absolutely right. There's from my, it's obvious to see that there's a kind of massive power grab going on, within the political sphere. And it's not a conspiracy theory to talk about the World Economic Forum or Klaus Schwab, because it's a document that, you can go and find and you can read it. So and George Soros and his sort of fingers that are in every pies, and it's certainly not a conspiracy theory to turn around and say that social media is completely controlled as to what you can say. It's politicized now. It's run for that reason. You're only allowed to post things if they follow the narrative. So what do I think is going on in government? I think there's a number of things going on, and I certainly don't think Boris Johnson is necessarily, running the show, as I would say. But yeah, I think there's a lot more, that we could say about stuff. But I just think at the moment we don't even need to go there. There's enough evidence, as far as I can see, about the harms that the government have done and how negligent they have been. Just looking at these few things that we've looked at today, we can say, but what about this? What about this? What about this? They're negligent. They're negligent, and they can be sued for that, for damages. So, presumably there's a decent case there, a case for malfeasance. Maybe we don't have to start worrying about all the other things that we think at the moment might be going on. It's enough to be able to show people the negligence. And I just wanted to just end on the bed data that I had. So this is the bed data.
There's another thing to end on as well.
Yeah, you carry on while I'm getting the bed data, because it's having a funny half an hour every now and again. So let's see if I can get it up on here.
So I want just to say about, because I'd like to leave people with something positive about what's coming. So what's coming obviously is Simon's documentary. Now, what Simon's documentary is going to help us all do with those people who are stuck in their cognitive dissonance of believing that actually herd immunity isn't going to save us and Sweden did something wrong. But the documentary is going to collapse all of the myths that the media have been perpetuating, the propaganda that they've been creating around Sweden will all be dismissed, because there will be the front and center evidence of that. So hopefully that's going to be published fairly soon. Now, the other thing I want to just say is that what Claire and I have talked about quite a lot is, there's a lot of Facebook groups, and many of them have disappeared, unfortunately, but people trying to come together, find a place to come together, a way to collaborate, to share information, not to scare the crap out of each other, as much as we are sharing all of this information. This information we're sharing today is really just to prove that the council, Essex County Council, and any other council who decide to take up these measures are doing it for the wrong reasons, and they're not doing their research, and they don't have a balanced view of what's really going on, and they should not be accepting checks from the government to stop us from living our lives normally and naturally without A, asking us first, and B, finding out whether that's actually really necessary or even the right thing to do, or is it going to cause more harms? Where's the risk assessment? There isn't one. We know that for a fact, right? So one of the things that we've come to realize is that as much as like me and Claire have come together, we've come together with other people that you know of, people like Jacqueline. We know, you know, the Facebook groups have got their own name, but they're almost like their own branded identity. And they work very hard to collaborate with each other and with all of you to do things that they believe are positive. But what there isn't is any kind of real, there's not a portal that actually organizes everything and everyone, whether it's the legal, because we've got more and more people coming on board legally who want to fight this. We've got more and more medics and physicians and scientists coming on board who want to fight this. There are a number of different political parties that have been springing up, and more of those are going to appear, plus also independents. But for an independent to have a way forward, if you like, so that you as a voter have decided in your, so say you've got a couple of conservatives, a couple of Labour, and a couple of other parties, a Liberal as someone else, and then there's an independent, but the independent has got some ideas and things that you have some faith in, but you wouldn't necessarily understand what that means and if they're worth voting for. They might align with your beliefs and so on, but you might want to feel like that they're one person. So what I think the good news is that there are a lot of people out there who are actually talking about ways to develop a system that is more collaborative, a way for all of those collectives to come together so that they can actually start to build a plan for how we can go forward with more confidence, that we're not going to ever allow a government to do what it has. I mean, let's go back in the olden days, back when we had kings and queens in this country and we were being invaded by, you know, Vikings and what have you. And a king or a queen could just decide that you're not allowed to eat, and you would be not permitted to eat. And if you farmed or did any kind of activity, all your taxes, you know, think Robin Hood days, right? So we know that there have been unfairnesses in the past, and we know that we've had to fight, and there's always been some way for the good to surface. That always happens. The good surfaces. The people's strength, the people's will, the people's desire for fairness and goodness and honesty always comes to the surface. So I just want you to keep that in mind as we hand back over to Claire and look at all of these figures, these brightly coloured figures.
Yeah, so the reason that I'm sharing this is twofold, really. Number one, so that you can see how the misinformation is that's given, but also that anybody that is desperately frightened that our hospitals are overflowing and our wards are overflowing and there's people that are dying left, right, and centre, that, you know, go and look for the data. This is from Aintree and Royal in Liverpool. Okay, so Royal and Broad Green is the first one we're going to look at, and this is the day before Liverpool has been put into, or it might have been 2 days before they're into their hard lockdown again now. So what you will see is here that you have got a total of 864 beds, okay, between the sites in this hospital, with 51 at critical care. They had 10 empty high risk beds, okay, and they had 85 COVID positive patients occupying beds out of a total of 864. Okay, so that's just 10%. All right. In Aintree, you've got 795 beds, okay, and a total of 26 COVID people. Okay, so this was not supposed to be released, and we keep finding stuff like this and saying, oh, I wonder how we got our hands on that. And I'm just wondering if there are people in there that are like setting it to public so that people can find it. But this is a Google Drive document that I've saved in my Google Drive now, that is accessible to anybody from my Twitter. I can put it on Facebook if people want it. It's also in my Telegram group. But, you know, I had a conversation, funnily enough, with a client the other day that was saying the same about, oh, it's really terrible, isn't it, all these people that are ill now, that, you know, all these cases. And I sort of said, well, do you know what, take it from somebody that has a family member that works in ICU in a major city hospital, okay, in Leeds, that has told me they have got people in ICU. I think it was 8, it could have been 6, it was no more than 8. But the good news was that their stays were much shorter. They weren't as ill as people were in March. and now they've got much better treatments because they're not just whacking everybody on ventilators. They've got clinical treatments they can offer: remdesivir, dexamethasone, zinc, the word we're not allowed to say that begins with H and ends in Quinn.
Oh, yeah.
So they have got much better treatment, so the prognosis for people is much better. And these are all people I asked. I said, are they all old people? And actually they weren't all over 80. Some were younger, but they had really complex comorbidities, which is, we know, is the vulnerable group. So there was nobody that was 20, and nothing wrong with them in there. There was nobody that was 30, 40 with nothing wrong with them in there. These were people that would need, if they got flu, would be in the same position.
Yeah.
Okay, they would need that extra help. Okay, and as we know now, it's going to become increasingly difficult for us to split out certain things, because the flu deaths and the COVID deaths are going to be fed to us as one in the ONS figures. We're waiting, I think, for the first weeks to come out to see how that looks, but I'm sure those amongst us that are truth warriors will be able to find that information and get that out there. So I just wanted to end on that positive note that, no one's saying that there aren't some people in hospital that are poorly, but let's be honest, that happens every year with flu. You don't hear about it. We have to learn to get on with our lives and live. Otherwise, we would have nothing. There would be no economy. There would be nothing. So I hope that is a positive thing to end on. Yes, there are people in hospital, but they are not nearly as ill as they were. Their clinical outcomes are much better, and the treatments are better, and they're in there for a shorter period of time. So that's all positive. And I just I don't know, I mentioned that you mentioned There Is Another Way, the Swedish documentary. We didn't touch on false positives because we've run out of time, but we can do that another time. But yeah, the YouTube link here, if you haven't seen who wants to watch a couple of minutes of ranty me, because I tell you why, I feature in the trailer for this. Are you impressed? Look at this, watch this. I thought it might be quite nice to play us out on it, that it's quite uplifting. There is another way. And let's remind everybody that tomorrow we've got the injunction hearing. Do you know if that is in live court? Is it being is it attended court, or is it a virtual hearing, Leah, at all? Have you spoken to Simon?
I don't know. There's some things that are up in the air a little bit, and I know that they haven't allowed people to go into court, so there was the potential, I think, for some people just wanted to sort of be there and be supportive. But I think just keep an eye on Simon's Twitter.
Yeah, so that's what we'll do, and we'll feed back. And we're happy to do. We've decided that we're the real news now, and I've always wanted to be a newsreader that does this. I'm so excited, I forgot. Welcome to the 3 o'clock news. So we might do a few more of these if you guys have liked it. This is the documentary that you can get if you want to. I'll just play us out really while me and Leah fiddle about and finish off. And if you've stayed with us to the end, thank you very much, and I hope you've learned something. And if you want any links to anything or any more information, watch the video back. You'll be able to see where everything is. So bye. Thanks, Leah. Playing us out.
Sound.
So guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Ending on a positive, and yeah, we will be back with real news soon. See you all. Bye, 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 bye.